Okay, all right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. This is, what is this, the fourth in our STEM series, our STEM communication series. I'm Ara Young, Assistant Director in the Center for Graduate Life, and I'm joined today by Jory Weintraub and Karl Bates. They are from the Duke Initiative for Science and Society, which fosters research, education, communication, democratic deliberation, and policy engagement on the ethical progress of science and technology in society. Jory is the Science Communication Program Director at the initiative and a senior lecturing fellow. He teaches courses in science communication and runs science communication workshops. And he's also the director of the Duke Broader Impacts Resource Center, which he established to support the Duke University research community in its efforts to develop, implement, assess, and disseminate broader impacts, activities, and initiatives. Karl Bates is a science journalist and director of communications at Duke. He's a veteran communicator and manager with specialized skill in science and medicine. He's nationally recognized in science journalism and university relations, and he holds a master in journalism from Northwestern. So yeah, thanks, Jory and Karl. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys now.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Okay, it's going to be my turn to go first. And I understand this is not your very first session, but nonetheless, I'm going to just very quickly hit some of the high points of what we consider the essentials of science communication, just to refresh you and to sort of set the stage for what I'm going to talk about after that, which is how to work with news media. How do you do a good interview about your science when there's such a big difference between the rigor and detail and complexity of your work and the simplicity and quotability that the media wants? And it's often a bridge that scientists fall off of and they wonder why. So I'm going to try to help you fix that. Let me attempt to screen share on unfamiliar WebEx. And that says go, share, and boom. Now, are they seeing slideshow view? I'm not.
It's not, yeah.
Got it? Should be the I am pay pyramid at the Louvre. Okay, I lost all of your faces, so I'm just going to talk to my camera like there's nothing going on. So the quick takeaway here is that scientific communication is set up in a very different structure. If you think about the way an academic paper is structured, it's like this pyramid at the top. You start out very broad, there's lots of background, there's the history of the field, and the unanswered questions, there's your methodology, there's all the experiments you try, blah, 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 blah. Down there at the bottom on page 12, you actually at the end of the discussion say, and this is what we found. That's great. That's the way science has always been set up. It's the way, frankly, a lot of science classes are taught, which is one of the reasons I never made it to science myself and ended up in journalism instead. It takes a lot of patience to work with that, and scientists are comfortable with that. You guys like having all the parts labeled ahead of time. But newsflash, the public can't stand it. It seems like a lecture when you have to teach them everything they're supposed to know before you tell them what the news is. So if you learn nothing else today, it is to flip that pyramid. The thing that you would put at the end of your discussion is actually the first thing that should be out of your mouth. We found snails that can fly. How do you know that? Why should I care? Not all of the background and rigmarole that leads up to your incredible finding, but start with the point. It has to be clear, focused, and ideally memorable. And the best model for this is if you've watched any TED Talks, look at the way a TED Talk starts. The person strides out on stage, the applause dies down, and then she says something incredibly declarative and bold. You know, we think flying snails are the future. That's the conclusion to the way scientists talk, but that's actually the beginning of the way you should be talking to everybody else, including, we'll talk about later, journalists. So spend some time thinking about how to reduce your work, your latest finding, or your body of work, or your big question, down to one little nugget. And I will use the pejorative, the soundbite. You really need to think about it as a headline. Get your thing down as tight as you can as a starting point. That means leaving out a lot of detail, leaving out a lot of nuance, leaving out a lot of statistics, and that's kind of painful for people to do. But you got to start with a good, clear, focused statement of purpose. Here's what I'm going to tell you now. All right. And that clear statement of purpose has to be tailored to your audience. Are you talking to career day sixth graders, or are you talking to a congressional subcommittee? Are you talking to your fellow scientists, or are you talking to the history department? Your audience is the most important part about this, not you. And if you really want them to think you're super smart, you'll be understood well and clearly. The first way to turn off an audience is to talk over their heads, to speak your language, not theirs. They think you're a jerk. It makes them uncomfortable to hear words they don't know, and they tune you out, and they don't like you as well. So the key thing is to connect with your audience. And if it's a small enough group, maybe you just start with a question. Hey, do you guys know what a gene is? You know, show of hands, just to get the temperature of the room and to know sort of what level you're supposed to come in at. Knowing who your audience is also helps you think about the questions that you need to answer. What would they care about? Or what's their baseline of knowledge? What do they know and find interesting? And what details can I leave out that they won't care about? Where are they coming from? Not where am I coming from? Super important. It's a form of empathy to put yourself into the audience. We'll talk about this more in the media stuff too. So jargon, I hope you've covered already. It's kind of a laden word and it means different things to different people. But in a nutshell, the big fancy words that are so great for science, you know, a powerful word like retrotransposon, people spent their entire careers trying to figure those things out. And you can just explain that concept in a single word. That's beautifully powerful. But to somebody who's never heard the word retrotransposon, they have no idea what you're talking about. So even though it's handy and efficient and the coin of your realm, it may not be the right thing for the audience. There are also lots of traps. There's everyday English words that we could spend a whole session on, like significance is my personal favorite. Significance to you means the p-value is less than 0.05, right? Significance, what the public hears is this is really important. And you see this all the time in the popular press. Their findings were significant. Well, yeah, they met the statistical bar, but it doesn't mean they were super important. But the public doesn't track with that. So you have to be careful about using words that your audience would use, not words that you would use. Okay, tell a story. We know from all kinds of neuroscience that people relate to narrative. They like their ideas to be packaged in a story with characters and action, good guys and bad guys, and a journey or a quest or a mystery to be solved. If you think about all of the holy texts on earth, all the different religions have a book that is a story. It's got characters in it. It's not a list of rules. It's parables and fables and people taking journeys and whatnot. That's how we relate to things. So think about your science in a way that will help you make it into a story. Like you solved this incredible mystery, or you started looking for thing number 1 and you ended up finding thing number 6 instead. That's a cool story. Anything that puts it into a narrative form and has characters and you maybe have more personality than your science colleagues want you to have, that's all good. That's what an audience locks onto. Be definitive. Now, this is painful for some people too. You're always wanting to say, these findings suggest that blah, 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 blah. But the public, when you equivocate and put in a trapdoor for yourself, an out, if you will, when you say, well, we're 80% certain of this, but the public perceives that as evasiveness, that you're waffling, that you're not really sure of what you're saying. And in the case of controversial subjects like climate change or evolution, they look at that as a sign of weakness. Well, you guys don't really know. It's just a theory. So the public demands that you be definitive. You could still do that in a waffly way. Instead of saying, we're pretty sure that 47.5% of the audience, blah, 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 blah. You could say about half. That leaves you an out, but you could still sound definitive, and everybody knows what about half is. So that's a great way to go. Okay, let's go to media relations. Excuse me. This is what the media look like on TV, right? They're jostling, they're swearing at each other, they're throwing elbows, the flash bulbs are going off. It looks super stressful and super scary, and it is. And when we say to scientists, oh, we'll get you some media for this, this is what they think is going to happen to them. It's not. When you're dealing with a scientific finding, if you're going to be an expert of some sort in some sort of scientific field, mostly you're dealing with reporters one-on-one, usually over the phone, sometimes over video now, but you're not ever going to be subjected to this kind of mob where you don't have any control and they're all really super aggressive. Hollywood has done to journalists what it's done to scientists, and the public perception of what journalists are actually like is very different from the reality, just as it is with the perception of science. You will not be facing this kind of stress. More likely, it'll be something like this, where you're sitting down, people are asking intelligent questions. So how do interviews happen? In the previous example, it was a Supreme Court ruling, and the governor of Arizona was there to represent the state, so they all mobbed her and wanted her to comment. But how are you as a scientist going to be interviewed? Usually it's because you've made some news. You have a new finding out. Or the local media are looking to you to explain something to them for which you're an expert. Journalists themselves aren't experts at anything. They borrow every bit of knowledge they have. They borrow every bit of knowledge they present, I should say. So they're always looking for experts. They need you as an expert to help them understand the story. Give them some context, explain how this new wrinkle fits into the larger scene. And you're seeing a lot of this in COVID coverage, right? Tony Fauci has become a rock star. He's actually been famous for decades, but most Americans hadn't heard of him until 6 months ago. Because he's an expert, because he's helping us get our minds around what this thing is, and we look to him for advice on what it means and how it's happening. That's what experts do. Very often when you're the expert, you're also going to be asked, well, so what happens next? Because that's just a good way to pursue a story in journalism world. So that, they might be asking you to make some predictions. Whether you can or not is another story. The conundrum is that to do interviews, you have to do interviews. So how do you even start that process? Well, working with your communications office, wherever you may find yourself, any kind of researcher at a research university or in a government agency or an NGO or wherever you end up doing your work, you're probably going to have a communications person like me. Getting to know them and understanding what it is they need to do their job is a great start for you to begin to get out there and to be exposed as an expert. And I should add, why would you want to do that, right? The traditional objection is, oh, it's too much time. The media is going to screw it up, blah, blah, blah. The answer is, it's good for your career. It is good to be seen. It is good to be exposed. Even though we don't officially count it as part of your score towards tenure, it really matters to be visible and to be seen. You go to a meeting and people know who you are because they just read a story about you in the popular press. And dirty little secret, your colleagues read the popular press just as much as they read the primary literature, if not more. Chances are the first they hear of your new paper is going to be on Twitter or in the newspaper, not from reading the actual journal. So it behooves you to get out of your academic lane and try to communicate to the broader world. So share your latest papers, share commentary, opinion pieces. Again, you guys are experts. Society needs your help understanding what this means to this, that, or the other thing. What do the experts think? Get out there and participate. Participate in social media as well, carefully. And having done that, once media know you exist and start to seek you out as an expert, you have to be known as an expert who is available. They can reach you when they want, and you will respond to them quickly, and you won't waste a bunch of their time. They want you to be available, responsive, and give them a good quote and be done. And, we have faculty like in politics and public policy at Duke who literally are doing media interviews every day. And it only takes them 5 minutes because they know what they're doing. They know exactly what the reporter needs. Hey, Fred, what do you want today? Quote, quote, quote. Thank you very much. Bam. They're done in 10 minutes. They reach 500,000 people. It's a great use of your time. The short answer is you engage and start to be public to get interviews. The press aren't just going to discover you because you're so brilliant and you published a paper in the obscure journal of whatever. You have to do a little more than that to get discovered. All right. In the news business, timing is everything. And a late story is what I call a box of hairy strawberries. Nobody wants it if it's a week late. So think ahead. Do you have a paper coming up? Is there something going on in the news that you're an expert at? Are you about to give a presentation at a conference? Anything that you see coming ahead that you think might be worth sharing to the public, tell your news people about it ahead of time. The bane of our existence is, hey, Karl, we were in Nature last week. I can't do anything with that. It's a box of hairy strawberries. So get ahead. And journalistic timing is measured in minutes, not months. That's often an adjustment for academics as well. They're kind of shocked that, well, she emailed me last week, and by the time I answered her, she said she'd already done the story. Yeah, she's probably doing 3 stories a day, and a week-long lag in response to the email is much too much. You got to respond to people. If you want to engage with the media, you got to respond quickly, right away. And we'll talk about that in a second too. All right, so I already kind of went over this. What do they need? They need responsiveness. They want to know that you're alive and you're willing to talk today. They want a good quote. They don't want a lecture. They don't want you to do that upside down pyramid and talk to them for 45 minutes before you give them the thing they need. They just want whatever it is they've asked you. And it's important also to get out of lecture mode and to give short answers and to let them lead. So the questions will bring you along. Try to avoid banging the desk, Jory says. Sorry about that. In the interest of time today, we're not going to go into the nuance, but essentially when you're contacted by a reporter, the first thing you want to ask them is, what's your deadline? How soon do you need this? Is it a taped interview or is it going to be live? Excuse me. Is it print? Do they just want one paragraph or do they want an hour-long interview? Just get a feel the very first time you talk to them what the parameters are. And you can ask, well, who else have you talked to? What's your angle here? Things like that, just to get a feel for who you're dealing with and what you're doing. Anticipate your audience. I think I already said this at the top, but again, your audience determines your message. That sounds kind of weird because you're the one trying to get your message out, but it has to be targeted to your audience. So for example, if you're doing an hour-long interview on Vermont Public Radio, that's a certain demographic. Those are college-educated people, and they're listening and they're paying close attention. But you might also get approached by drive time rock and roll radio in Chicago. That's an audience that's doing 3 other things and they're distracted and they maybe don't have the college education. So your messages have to be tailored to who it is you're dealing with. And again, what do they want to know? What would they find interesting? What are their reference points? Can you think of examples that would resonate with your audience's life experience? And ahead of time, before you talk to your journalist, think about just the 3 essential things you would want anybody to know. And you're going to put those on a little piece of paper, not a big piece of paper. A little piece of paper, point 1, point 2, point 3. And then during the course of the interview, you make sure you get those 3 points in, kind of almost irregardless of what the questions are. You make sure that your 3 points that you wanted to deliver are getting through. All right, things you can add that'll make your story even more understandable. Visuals. Do you have a map of where this occurred? Do you have a picture of the organism? Do you have a schematic that shows the receptor and the ligand coupling up? Anything that'll help somebody see it is important, and particularly now in the internet age of news, basically every story has to have some kind of image with it. So at the time you're preparing your paper, be thinking about, okay, how can we illustrate this? What visuals do we need? Think of examples and anecdotes, anecdotes being the storytelling approach to data, right? You've been taught 1,000 times that the plural of anecdote is not data, but the simple fact is one good anecdote is worth tons of data. And people in political discourse know this. All I have to do is drop a phrase like death panel, and I can just destroy your argument. An anecdote is a powerful tool, and it works with people better than any amount of statistics. So try to think of some anecdotes and some stories and some examples. You can use numbers. They can certainly be empirically based. You don't have to make stuff up. But try to have a storytelling approach rather than the data will speak for themselves and I'm just going to vomit a bunch of data on you. That does not work. Numbers, be very selective with your numbers. Don't overdo it. Too many numbers is confusing to people, and there's tons of readability testing that shows that every time a number appears in the text, you lose readers. So what we encourage you to try for is just a handful of really good numbers, like this affects 1 in 10 Americans. Just little quick touch point numbers that will really hammer home the point you're trying to make, and leave out all the data, all the detailed data and the error bars and the p-values and all that stuff. Those are just a turn off to the general public. Okay, so ring, the reporter calls. What are you going to do? Well, first of all, you're going to make the bet, okay? and you're going to close that cabinet, and you can get those damn pillows off the floor. This guy, this is pathetic, right? He's on live TV. He took the time to shower and shave, but wow. So you must respond immediately. If you get an email or a call, it's really important to respond immediately, but you don't have to do the interview right then. In fact, if you're a novice, it's better that you don't. But you respond right away, or they just keep going until they find somebody who's going to talk. Again, they're on a tight deadline. They need an expert on retrotransposons. They're going to call people until they get somebody live. They may not need to do the interview right that minute either, but the point is they need somebody today. So respond right away. Hey, I'd be happy to talk to you, Fred, but I'm really busy. You can just tell a little white lie. I'm really busy right now. What's your timeline? What's your deadline? What kind of story is this? Who else have you talked to? Ask a couple of those questions. And then you can schedule time. Well, I tell you what, man, I'm available at 3 after I teach. Would that be a good time? Sure, that'd be great. Boom. Now you can do your due diligence on them. Google the person, find out who they are, what their news outlet is. If it turns out to be something kind of nefarious, you don't have to do the interview, right? You don't ever have to do the interview, and particularly not if it's somebody who's going to probably do you harm. Do your homework, call a news office, figure out who these guys are, prepare your 3 points so you know what it is you're going to say. Prepare your space. If it's going to be a Zoom call or whatever, make sure the background is flattering and the lighting is good, and maybe get the brand in there. If you can get UNC Charlotte coffee cup into the shot, that's always good practice. Okay. All right, you ready? So you got your 3 Post-its. You've got some short answers. You're bringing the energy. You're talking like I am, kind of manic, hands waving, moving your head a lot, because TV and radio flatten you out. If you just have a very calm affect and you just talk as if you were talking to somebody in real life, it really, the video camera just takes that right out of you, and there's no dynamism in your voice, and people just kind of fall asleep. Okay, say it's a big TV interview. Good Morning Charlotte wants to talk to you. Chances are you're going to be contacted ahead of time by somebody called a producer who will put you through your paces ahead of time, which is great rehearsal. But what they're really doing is preparing the questions for their host, who's a TV guy who really doesn't know very much. So you're actually writing your own interview when you do the pre-interview, and they'll ask you straight up, so what's the takeaway here? What's the most important point? Boom, there's bullet number 1 from your Post-it. You can scratch that off. You put it right in their hands, and they're going to ask you, what's the most important thing? Point number 1. All right, what to wear? Dr. Ginsburg here is wearing a lovely checked jacket, right? In the digital age, those things vibrate like mad on TV, So you want to go with a solid color, although this shirt has a pattern to it too, but solid colors, mid-tone, not white, not black, but something in the middle. Keep it fairly simple. Ladies, avoid the dangling jewelry. Everybody avoid crazy hair. Take a quick look in the mirror, because if you just have one flyaway hair, nobody's going to hear a word you're saying. That's the way TV works. If there's a distractor involved, they're just not going to hear you. So you have to look out for that. And then this is very important and kind of an advanced skill. In your answer, or one fly on your head, right? Mike Pence proved that perfectly. When you're answering the question, it's really good to rephrase the question at the top of your answer. So the questioner will say, so what did you find inside the cell? Your answer, you shouldn't say organelles in a nucleus. Your answer should be, inside the cell, we found, blah, 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 blah. In most recorded interviews, the questions are clipped off, and it's just better for you to restate the question at the top of your answer. And it takes a lot of practice. I'm not very good at it myself, but it's always nice to sort of echo that question back to the person as the preface to your answer, because it makes the editing better. And for the listener, it just makes it that much more clear what you're talking about. Everybody will love you for restating a question. You should never just say, that's right. It doesn't work that way. Okay, that's it for my PowerPointage. And now, do I have to unshare?
I assume you have to unshare, yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to, I don't know how many people we have total, but we're going to break everyone up into 2 breakout groups. And I'm going to go into one, and Karl's going to go into the other. And we're going to do a couple quick practice media interviews. Now, I know you haven't had time to absorb all this, and you haven't had time to prepare and sketch out your 3 points on your Post-it note. So we're going to be very forgiving with you on this.
We'll be gentle. We'll be gentle.
But we wanted to give you a chance to sort of practice that. So we'll go into breakout groups, and hopefully we'll get to at least 2 or 3 of you in each group. And we'll do that until about 4:45. So that gives us about 20 minutes. And then we will come back and we'll talk about dealing with policymakers in round 2 of this discussion.
Yeah, so there's 2 role plays today. One is the first one, we're going to pretend to be talking to a reporter, and the second one, you're going to be pretending to be talking to a Republican congressman from Kentucky.
Or some other policymaker.
Okay, I'm going to attempt to start these breakout sessions, and bear with me for just 1 sec, because how long do we want to be in these?
20.
Till 4:45.
Till 4:45?
Yeah.
15 minutes. And I'm going to do
18 minutes.
18 minutes. Okay, so hopefully, Karl and Jory, you will be going to 2 separate rooms here. Let's just keep our fingers crossed.
If not, well, we'll see you back here. Something's happening.
You guys disappearing and going into rooms now?
I'm still with you.
Okay, hang on a sec. What is going on?
We can do it en masse.
Yeah, we if it's not working, we can just do it in front of the whole group, and Karl can lead, and then I'll lead the policymaker interview.
Okay, that seems not ideal though, right? Let me just try one more time.
Oh, it's fine. We've done it.
Okay, well, if you want to stay this way, then we'll do that then.
Yeah, we'll go with the keep it simple method for now.
Okay.
All right.
So.
Okay.
So I need a volunteer to be an expert, and I will be a reporter.
They're going to be on what? Good Morning Charlotte, the morning.
Yeah, pick your show. You want Good Morning Charlotte, or NPR morning show in Charlotte, drive time morning radio. What's your pleasure, and who's it going to be?
By the way, Karl and I have a policy with our workshops. If you don't volunteer, you might be voluntold. So. Do we have volunteers?
You wouldn't pass. All right. Nija? Is that right?
You're muted.
I'm unmuting.
Oh, okay.
Can you say your name for me, please?
Nija.
Okay, I guessed right. Good.
Yes, yeah, right.
What kind of work do you do? What kind of science do you do?
I'm in anthropology and doing public health. It's a dual. So I'll be dealing with the mortality rate of infants and mothers in the United States.
All right. Not that that's good news. It's a good topic. It's a news thing. Huge bus crash. I say, great story, but it's not a great story. It's a bad story. Okay. So you have just completed a story about infant mortality in Mecklenburg County, maybe, right?
Yes. Yes, I did complete a story.
County Public Health Department, whatever. And so I'm going to put you on the morning radio show, and you're going to tell us about your findings.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. And I can give you just a pro tip here that you're going to start with your biggest, kind of most shocking finding is going to be one of the first things that come out of your mouth. All right. Even if you have to make a number up, Nija, that's all right. We're just playing here.
Okay.
So, Jory, can you give me 4 minutes on this because it's radio?
You got it.
That's the other thing. If you talk to a newspaper reporter, you can take all the time you want because she's going to write it up and put it in print. You talk to a radio or TV reporter, they got finite seconds to deal with. So you got to get the job done. We won't make this live radio, but okay.
I'm going to give you 3 minutes. You get 3.
Because I just ate up minute number 1.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Dr. Granite, on Good Morning Charlotte, and congratulations on your PhD.
Thank you.
We're following up on this infant mortality report that you issued yesterday. Could you just tell us what the news is here? What's going on with infant mortality in Mecklenburg right now?
Sure, I'd like to share some of the data that we have going on right now. In the world, for all developed countries, United States is the #1 country with mortality rate for infants and women. And depending on the race, there's a 3 to 4 chance that you're going to die or have long-lasting effects for the rest of your life, either you or your child, due to certain practices that we have in our Western hospitals.
No kidding. So what practices are those that are causing the infant mortality? What's the problem?
So right now, what we're seeing to be the problem is the communication between the cultures, because right now it's Hispanic and African-American women are 3 times to 4 times more likely to die or have permanent damage. So it has to do with culture, communication, the prenatal care, education, and preconceived notions when it comes to the OBGY discipline.
Gotcha. Okay. So in addition to patient education, we're probably talking about doctor education here too, right?
Correct. We're talking about how they're being trained and based off the foundation of how OBGYN started, as well as preconceived notions of assuming certain personalities or ethnic cultures manage diets or lifestyles a certain way.
Stereotypes, it sounds like you're describing.
That's exactly what it is. Sometimes they're right, but a lot of times they could be deadly.
Seems like it would be helpful to have a more diverse core of physicians as well.
That is true. I do believe that will help. Unfortunately, we can't control that, but what I can control is getting the information out there to ensure that people are conscious of what might be a blind side they have, to be more mindful of it when dealing with their patients, and patients going in have better understanding of what's going on so they can ask the right questions and advocate for themselves.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Grant. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So that was about 2.5 minutes. Very nice job.
All right.
Thank you.
My immediate feedback, Nija, would be the first thing you should have said was about the third thing you said, and that was the disparity in Hispanic and Black infant mortality. That's a stunning, stark number. That would have been the first thing to start with rather than the U.S. view, because what I asked you about is what's going on in Mecklenburg County, right? And you could say something like, Mecklenburg reflects the rest of the nation, in which Black and Hispanic mothers have a much higher rate of infant mortality, and stop. And then I say,
I agree, but sometimes when you say that, it becomes their issue, not my issue, and I lose people. So making sure you realize it's a United States issue then break it down seems to help more so, because that's what happens. Like, oh, I don't have to worry about it because it's never going to be me because I'm not brown or Black. That happens. So that's the only reason I didn't lead with that. But I understand what you're saying.
Okay. I'm glad you had a reason. That's good. Perfectly defensible. How'd she do, guys? Any peer feedback? Was she clear? She used numbers well? I mean, if we had a little more time, Nija, you could have told us a story. You know, you could have picked out an example of a case or talked about the difference between one municipal market that's doing things well and one that isn't. You know, anything to make it kind of a story, give some shape to the data.
So I'll jump in with a few comments. Really nice job overall, especially since you had zero time to prepare.
Yep.
You had a good command of the statistics. You had them right there at the tip of your tongue, so you didn't even have to pause to think about them. So it really sort of conveyed your expertise and your knowledge of the topic. You did a good job of coming back to the statistic. So you cited the statistic, and then later you came back to it, and that really emphasized it, which was powerful. One of the best things you did, and it's the thing that is almost always a mistake that people make, that they don't do this, is you had really nice, concise, short responses. The typical scientist thing to do is to recite the entire 25-year history of their research program in the first response, and you kept every answer really concise, which was outstanding.
The classic mistake is to try to tell the entire story in your first answer. And
my big thing now is transitioning, because I was military for 20 years and we're quick and to the point, and now I'm writing papers and dealing with academia and things are going forever, and I'm like, just get to the point.
Don't change.
Get to the point.
Surprisingly, given that you just said you were in the military for 25 years or whatever, you were not very jargony. And I know that the military is all about jargon, but part of it, sometimes it's the nature of what you work on, right? So when you work on social sciences and anthropology and things like that, it tends to be, the language generally tends to be a bit more accessible than if you're a chemist and every third word out of your mouth is a chemical name that only another chemist would know. A couple of comments I had that could have, possible changes. And again, we threw this at you right away, and we're appreciative that you even volunteered to participate. But it's always nice to start with, well, thanks, Karl, very much for having me, and then go into your response. That's just sort of, a way to sort of ease into the interview.
Oh, she did that. No?
I don't think she
I did do it.
Okay, maybe I missed it. I was listening for it. So,
But it's good to be reminded. Thank you.
Yep.
well, and I may have missed it.
It's just manners 101. Thanks for having me, Fred.
What's that?
Thanks for having me, Fred.
Exactly. And then, again, Karl acknowledged this is really hard to do, and we all struggle to do it well, but trying to begin your response by sort of rephrasing the question. And again, the reason for that is that way, if they just want to pull that clip out, they don't have to play Karl's question. Okay. They just you have a standalone quote that they understand the question and the response just by playing your quote. And then the only other comment I had was, if you have more time, weave in a story of an individual, which Karl already mentioned. But overall, it was really a great job. You did a nice job. I think all that military training definitely pays off because you showed very good discipline, I think, in how you responded. So,
thanks.
You're ready. Just about.
Should we do one more, Karl?
Yeah. How are we doing for time? Sure. We got time. Volunteers? None whatsoever. All right. Oh, Destiny won by just a fraction of a second.
Darn it.
Way to go, dude. What's with all those cables over your head there?
This is my amazing new office on campus in an old dorm room. There's no mold in here, so that's an improvement from the last building.
Well, there you go. All right. Things are looking up. That's a great place to put Christmas lights, maybe in a couple of weeks.
Totally.
All right. So, Destiny, what field are you in? What are you working on?
So I am a hydrogeochemist.
Awesome.
So I study stream restoration.
Ooh. Great. Is there any of that going on around Mecklenburg?
Yes, in fact, there is a lot. As Aura and I were just discussing before this started, there are countless restoration projects happening around the city.
Cool. Okay. What's our outlet? Good Morning, Charlotte?
Sure.
Or I don't
NPR.
know NPR, but
were we just talking about NPR Fridays, Science Fridays?
Science Friday. Oh, I can't do the guy's voice, Ira Flato. Actually, so seriously, if you were studying stream restoration and it's going on all over in Mecklenburg, a TV crew would take you out to a stream. You're going to be doing this interview standing up, and it might be windy and your feet might be cold, but you have to smile and give your sound bites. Anyway, so let's do, we'll just do public radio again. That's fine. You guys have a really good public radio guy too, David Borax. He's a science guy. He's terrific. Okay. So Destiny, let's see. How am I going to do this?
The clock's running, man.
Okay. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Destiny. We've been noticing a lot of heavy equipment and dump trucks and whatnot around the area's creeks, and we've been curious to know what's going on. I understand it has to do with something called stream restoration. What does that mean?
Thank you for having me on today for the show. Yes, there has been a lot of construction and heavy machinery around the streams within Mecklenburg County. And what we are doing right now is we're really focused on improving the stream quality. So the actual quality of the water within our streams within the city to have better places for recreation to occur, as well as to improve the lifestyles and the health of our citizens.
So what is it that the streams need to get them back to a better condition? I mean, what happened to them?
That's a great question. So within Mecklenburg County, the reason that our streams are degraded has to do with the increase in population within the county and the city in general. when we have a lot of people move into these urban areas, what we see is a lot of changes to the physical structure of our streams, which in turn leads to decreased water quality. And because, as we know, as we drive around and we're stopped at red lights, we see lots of people, more people, traffic jams get worse. So there are a lot more people, leading to more degradation of our streams. And so what we are doing is working to offset those impacts.
How?
That's a great question. So the way that we're working on offsetting those impacts is by coming in and revegetating, so planting new trees and different, or I can't say herbaceous, different plants, yes, different plants along the streams to collect any kind of debris that's left over from humans, as well as reducing the potential for contaminants to wash into our streams.
Okay, let's stop there in the interest
It's
of
so
giving
hard. It's
feedback
so
time.
cool.
There was one spot where I wanted to for sure give you some feedback, and that is you talked about sort of in the generic changes to the stream and decrease in quality. I need some examples to show me what that looks like. So you might say, as the suburbs have developed, more ground is paved and we're seeing more runoff. You know, paint me a picture instead of, you know, the generic changes in the stream. What are the changes in the stream? Because I'm not a stream morphologist. I have no idea what the changes would look like, and I don't know what a decrease in quality looks like. Is it cloudy? Is it too warm? Does it have garbage in it? You know, just be more focused on examples.
Yeah,
so
that's
you can see the problem you're discussing.
Yeah, that I've come across like trying to explain it and then using words like incision or like morphological changes and like trying to find the balance between the word to use and not making it too general and not making it too jargony is just so difficult.
And again, we just ambushed you and put you on the radio without any warning, so you did really well. So A++ on question repeating. You get it every single time. It was brilliant.
Yeah. So, yeah, I thought you did a good job as well. The thing I liked was at one point you said something like, as you know, when you're driving around and you see more traffic on the roads, and, you know, it was just a little example, but it was a really good way to pull the listener in and say something that they could relate to, right? So you made your work relevant to something that they see every day and what they do. And I thought that was a really effective moment. You said revegetating, and then you immediately defined it, which is okay. We always say, you know, we're not telling you don't ever use jargon because sometimes you have to. But if you're going to use jargon, then define it immediately. And in fact, a little trick is it works even better if you define it first and then you introduce the term. Because sometimes you can lose people just in the split second between when you say revegetation and then when you define it. But you did a really good job. And then immediately after that, you started to say herbaceous and caught yourself. So if, as a general tip to all of you, if you work in an area where there is a lot of jargon, have, you know, practice, have these alternatives to your jargony terms in your back pocket and be ready to go. Because you don't want to wait.
Morphology, shape.
You don't want to wait until you're in the middle of an interview to have to come up with that alternative or that synonym. So think about it in advance. And if there's jargony words that you just know you're going to have to use, be prepared to have a sort of everyday accessible language definition that you can present as well.
And like anything else, it gets better with practice. We're just encouraging you to be mindful and to anticipate what the issues are and then practice. And this is another great plug for your news office. When one of our faculty has a big thing coming, like a 60 Minutes interview or whatever, we rehearse them. We play act and we work through it so that they're more comfortable when they actually get to it. This is just like sports or playing a musical instrument. You have to do it to get good at it. You can't just read about it.
Yeah, it's like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get. So we're halfway through. It's 4:45. So we need to transition. In Zoom, which is what Karl and I are used to, there's a little button you can press that shows applauding hands, which is what we would be doing right now for our two volunteers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, volunteers. That was lovely.
We're going to hopefully get a chance to have one or two more of you volunteer in a few minutes to talk to a policymaker, and that policymaker will be me or Karl, depending on.
Oh.
We'll figure that one out. But in the
I
meantime,
do a wicked fine Republican Kentucky congressman, I tell you.
all right, then you're on the hook, Karl. We're gonna have you do that. Let me queue up my
Matters,
PowerPoint
baby.
here.
Got it.
Okay, and now let me. Boy, the learning curve here. A lot of you disappear when I do that, and there's got to be another way to do this. But anyway, I can't see all of you now. But Karl, you keep track of the chat, okay? All right. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, Karl. All right.
Gotcha. And you're in show mode, so let her rip.
Good. Okay. All right. So normally we would spend a couple hours or more in a workshop talking about how to meet with with media and do media interviews. And then we'd take a nice lunch break, have a box lunch, have some rubber chicken, something like that. And then in the afternoon, we'd spend all afternoon communicating to policymakers. We're trying to fit it all into an hour and a half. So I know we're rushing, but we're going to try and at least give you a flavor of both of these things. There are some things that are similar. A lot of the basic concepts that Karl shared with you and that you just got to practice for media interviews applied similarly to policymaker meetings, but there's a couple of twists there as well. And I'm going to start just by giving you a little bit of background first on sort of, why we meet with policymakers in the first place. And I'm actually going to go even further back than that, actually 70 years back, to address this question, which is, what's the role of science in American society? I know this seems very much like a 1970s schoolhouse rock, sort of, what's the point of government? But I think to ground us all and so that we're at the same point, we'll just start by addressing this question of what's the role of science in American society. And there's a guy that some of you may have heard of named Vannevar Bush, who was around a long time ago, kind of an amazing person, actually. If you read up on him, he did a little bit of everything. He was an engineer. He was sort of a computer scientist before there were computers and before they called it computer science. He was involved in the Manhattan Project. He was the person who single-handedly lobbied the U.S. government to create the National Science Foundation. He did a little bit of everything. He was sort of the Forrest Gump of science and government back then. And he put out a study, which actually this year is the 75th anniversary of that report, called Science, the Endless Frontier. And in that report, he described sort of what the role of science in American society is. And if you look at his list, I think even considering how much has changed in science and how much has changed throughout society over the last 70 years, this list is still a pretty good, pretty accurate list of the role that science should be playing in American society. And so, this, I think, it showed his vision, and it sort of showed what science can be or what science aspires to be and what it aspires to do for society. But of course, it doesn't just happen on its own, right? There are the researchers that are doing the research, doing the science, but there has to be something to connect the doing of science and the doing of research to actually affecting these changes. And that's where science policy comes in. So lots of definitions of science policy, but basically it's the rules and regulations that are imposed by some governing body to make sure that we understand how science is conducted and to sort of regulate the process of doing science. And of course, it's kind of a feedback loop because we use policy to shape the way we do science, but we also use science then to inform us on how we should enact policies. So it's sort of sometimes described as kind of the yin and yang of science and science policy. And, there's maybe no better example of this than if we go back to 1957, to the beginning of this space race, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, which was just this little metal ball about the size of a volleyball that they launched into orbit around the Earth. And all it did was circle the Earth and make a pinging sound. It was not a threat in any way. It didn't have any cameras on it. It didn't have any weapons on it. It was just a little metal ball that made a pinging sound. And yet it was a huge deal. It changed the world because this was the first time that human beings put an artificial satellite into orbit around the Earth. And if you don't have a good sense of the Cold War and the climate back then, it's hard to really appreciate how big of a deal this was. But this was terrifying to people all in the United States who felt like all of a sudden our mortal enemies, the Soviet Union, had this ability. Who knows what they could do if they could put this little pinging ball into space? Could they put cameras into space? Could they put weapons into space? You know, have we lost the space race already? And so this completely mobilized the US government, started the space race, and it was amazingly only 12 years later that it culminated with us landing the first men on the moon, right? So in just that short 12-year time span, our policies were completely transformed in this country to throw all the resources we could muster at winning the space race. So this is a really good example of how science policy can really transform what we're doing with science and with technology. And by the way, I said this was the 1969 landing on the moon. If any of you are a space geek the way I am, you can tell immediately by looking at this picture that this is actually not Apollo 11 and this wasn't the first lunar landing. And if you know why, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'm going to check later and see how many of you are space geeks like me. But there's a very dead giveaway that this was not Apollo 11. Okay, so that's just a very dramatic example of how policy can affect science, or policy can shape science. But there's a lot of things every day that happen that are affected in science that are affected by policy. Things like how we fund research, funding priorities, funding, that should say decisions, not precisions. That's a typo. Diversity initiatives in science, outreach mandates, training programs, stipends and salaries. All of these things are things that affect science and how it's done and are shaped by policies, right? And again, that yin and yang idea, there's also examples where science shapes policy. So for example, laws and regulations involving things like air quality, water quality, stream morphology, for example, just to pick an example out of the blue. Building codes, pharmaceuticals and drug usage, all of these things are things where science and research are shaping policies, right? So we know that this is important. We know that the connection between science and research and policy is a very important connection, right? A little bit more, and again, I'm rushing through an entire civics class in 10 minutes, but the question of who shapes this policy, who makes this policy, well, that's not a simple answer either. In fact, as you can see, it's very complicated. A lot of people make policy, a lot of people shape policy, a lot of people influence it, people and groups, right? But if we're talking at the federal level, really it primarily comes down to the executive branch and the legislative branch. So the president and Congress are the ones that largely are involved in making and shaping policy. And this is important because if these are the people, if Congress are the people that are making policies that affect the way we do science in this country, then we would hope that they have informed viewpoints on science. But as it turns out, historically, there has not been a lot of science represented in Congress. This is a makeup of Congress of the 115th Congress. We are currently in the 116th Congress. And when January rolls around, we'll start the 117th. So this was the Congress that was immediately before the last midterm elections, the 2018 midterm elections. So this Congress, the 115th, was in place from January of 2017 to January of 2019, okay? And in April of 2017, so not long after the 115th Congress was seated, we had the March for Science and all of the things that led up to the March for Science and this sort of big public awareness of, the importance of science in our society, right? And it's interesting to note that right before this Congress, which was, before the March for Science, there were a total, out of 541 total members of Congress, the House and Senate, there were 3 scientists total. Now, there were some physicians, there were some veterinarians, but in terms of people who were purely trained as scientists, there were 3 out of 541. In fact, there were almost as many almond farmers in Congress as there were scientists. And a lot of people seem really confused when I say that, but if you're from California, the way I am, you know that almond farming in California is a huge deal, and it consumes huge amounts of water resources. And I see Destiny nodding her head. You probably have a lot of familiarity with this. And so there's a lot of money involved in this as well. So it's not entirely surprising that there are 2 almond farmers in Congress. What was surprising, or what should be surprising, is how few scientists are actually present in Congress. There were only 3 in the 115th Congress. But of course, then the March for Science happened, and all of this dialogue came about of the importance of having more scientific perspectives and more scientific expertise in Congress. And so leading up to the 2018 midterm elections, we had a massive movement. There was an organization that was formed called 314 Action, and the 314 is 3.14. It was named after pi, and it was an organization, sort of a public action committee, that was really geared towards supporting getting scientists into political races and getting them into political offices, so we could have more dialogue and more expertise about science in our governing bodies. And so they were very active. They ended up running something like, as you can see, 70 scientists around the country for all different offices. And in fact, just in Congress, for Congress alone, for federal, the House and the Senate, there were 13 people, scientists, that ran with the support of this 314 Action Committee. And 7 out of the 13 actually won their seats. And so we went from 3 to 10 scientists in Congress at that one midterm election. And so the point of all this is that there's a shift in the dynamics, and we're starting to see a lot more sort of interface between the science community and the policy community, and more scientists, more than ever in history, are sort of venturing into this area of policymaking. But you don't have to run for Congress to make a difference as a scientist. You can affect science policy in lots of other ways as a scientist without, putting your science on hold and becoming a representative for 2 years or a senator for 6 years. So how can any one of you as a scientist have a voice in policymaking? Well, there's lots of ways to do it. You can do it through writing. You can write articles, you can write commentaries, you can write op-eds. There's lots of ways to do it through writing. You can do it through speaking in public fora, in doing media interviews, as we just talked about. You can do it through engaging in other ways with the public, through social media, or being involved in court cases as an expert witness to testify and affect policy that way through your expertise with science. And of course, you can do it by directly meeting with and talking with policymakers. And so that's what we're really focusing on in this segment, is talking with policymakers about what you do. And again, I know I'm rushing through a lot of this because I want to leave at least a few minutes to practice, do a mock interview or two. But let's talk a little bit about meeting with policymakers, and why should scientists even consider doing it? Why is it worth your time as scientists, as engineers, as people working in technology to take a break from all of the important research that you're doing to talk to policymakers? Well, for one reason, it's because it's expected of you by the federal government. So when Abraham Lincoln actually created the National Academies of Science in 1863, you can see the language here. It was very explicit. There's an expectation that scientists, as part of their job, are to serve as experts in their field, to whenever the academy or whenever the government of the United States needs that information, that expertise. So there's an expectation that scientists in this country, especially those that are supported by federal funding, will be a resource and share their expertise with the government and with the public. But more to the point, as a scientist, if you communicate with policymakers, then you can do things like advocate for science-based policies, and you can advocate for better funding for science. And most importantly, you can bring a diversity of perspectives that, as you can see, historically has always been lacking. And we are seeing more scientists in Congress now, but as I said, they're very relatively very few. So we need these diversity of perspectives to come from scientists, even if they're not running for a public office, right? And I want to make a couple more points before we launch into sort of the details of what it actually is like to meet with a policymaker, right? Karl talked about media interviews. And so it's important to think, why, as a scientist, would you do a media interview? As a scientist, you do a media interview largely to inform or to explain, to answer questions about the work that you're doing. More and more, we're starting to see people in media interviews doing some advocating as well, but largely, historically, we do media interviews to inform and explain, right? With a meeting with a policymaker, you are informing and explaining, but there's another element to it as well, which is that you're doing this to compel or to advocate for or to persuade, to change people's minds or to change their decisions about policy funding. So there's that added piece to it. It's like the difference between writing a research summary that just explains what you do in your research versus writing an op-ed or a commentary where you're actually advocating that people should behave or act or vote or make consumer choices a different way based on your science. So meeting with policymakers has that extra piece of compelling or advocating for certain behaviors based on the research that you're doing. Okay, so you're going to do it. You're going to meet with a policymaker. You've decided to take the plunge and go ahead and become an expert and meet with a policymaker. Or maybe you didn't decide, maybe you got the call. Maybe the chairman of your department said, you know, we got a contact from the government relations office here on campus, and they want an expert to go talk to a policymaker about stream restoration. And Destiny, you're the person. So we're calling on you to go meet with your congressperson. So what can you anticipate? Well, a few things to keep in mind in general, that when you're meeting with policymakers, schedules change constantly. So, you know, you may go all the way up to DC to meet with the policymaker and then not end up meeting with them. You might get way less time than you're promised, and you might only be promised 5 minutes of meeting with them to begin with, right? So the carbon footprint of traveling to DC for a 5-minute meeting notwithstanding, right, that may be the best opportunity you get is 5 minutes. And again, during that 5-minute period, the congressperson might be interrupted multiple times by staffers coming in and whispering something into their ear or handing them a note that they have to read. And it might end up being that you travel all the way to Raleigh or all the way up to DC, and you don't end up meeting with the congressperson at all. You end up meeting with their staffer. So all of these things could happen, and they're things you need to be prepared for. Now, I will say that it's not the worst thing in the world if you only end up meeting with the staffer. More often than not, as we've demonstrated, congresspeople aren't science experts to begin with, but they'll usually have at least one staffer who has at least a bachelor's in some STEM-related field, which makes them the science expert in the office. And so often by meeting with that person, you might actually have a better opportunity to really delve into the science a little bit deeper than you might with the policymaker. So, you know, you still want to meet with the policymaker if you can, but if you don't get the opportunity, don't assume it's a wasted trip because you're only meeting with the staffer. All right, so what do you do to prepare for all this? How do you get ready for this? Well, the first thing to know is that pretty much every college and university has at least a government relations office. I did a quick search before this session, and it looks like there's at least 2 or 3 different offices at UNC Charlotte that in various ways play roles in it, sort of being the liaison between the university and local, state, and federal political offices and policymakers. So, you know, find your government relations office. There's a decent chance that the way you get brought into this whole process is that they may be reaching out to you. And maybe the congressperson reaches out to the UNC Charlotte government relations office and says, we need an expert to talk about this. And then that person might find you and reach out to you. But if that doesn't happen, then you should reach out to your government relations office, because these are the experts. Their job is to know how to engage with policymakers. And so sit down with them beforehand and have them prep you and help you get ready for this. Figure out what your message is. And this goes back to what Karl said at the very beginning. This is just good basic science communication. You always want to know what your message is. In the case of meeting with a policymaker, is it an ask? Are you asking for something specifically? Are you asking for more funding? Are you asking for a change in policy? Or are you simply explaining what you do so that they understand how it's in a way that they understand that it's relevant to their constituents? The other thing you want to do, because you're probably not going to get much time with them, is prepare a one-page document that is sometimes called the policy one-pager or the leave behind, because you're going to leave it behind when you leave that office. And that's going to be a very concise document. It's not going to be a lot of text. It's going to be more of an infographic style thing. And it's going to have just the basic information, some nice images. It's going to have your name and contact info, and it's going to be a way that they can follow up with you and get more information. But it's most importantly, it's going to have the 2 or 3 main points that you want to share. What is your message? And then, as much as you can with your government relations office or with people in your lab, practice your 5-minute, your 10-minute pitch before you go, so that you're very comfortable delivering it. Okay, during the meeting with Policymaker, what can you expect? Well, introductions are a thing, right? In science, we sort of say, hey, I'm Jory, nice to meet you, and that's it. But when you're meeting with policymakers, there's a level of formality that you might not be used to in science. But you know, you're going to go around, everyone's going to introduce themselves. It's going to be a very formal process. But then it's your opportunity to pitch your message, to deliver your message. And again, as Karl said at the beginning, you want it to be clear, you want it to be concise, and you want to lead with that message. Remember that upside down triangle or pyramid that Karl talked about. And again, you want to frame it so that it's relevant to them, but more importantly, relevant to their constituents. So if your policy affects the lives of the people that they represent, you need to let them know how. And that's what's going to clue them in that this is important and it's relevant and they need to pay attention to you. As we talked about with media interviews, keep your sentences short, avoid jargon as much as possible. And the storytelling is really important with policymakers. Think about a typical policymaker or politician on the stump. What do they always say? They always say something like, I was in Des Moines, Iowa last week, and I met a mom who works 3 jobs to, you know, put food on the table for her kid. And her name was Phyllis, and Phyllis told me blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's a sample size of one, but it's a very compelling story. And that's what works with politicians and with policymakers, right? The storytelling is a critical part of it. So definitely bring a storytelling component into your discussion. Karl already talked about the importance of being definitive and not waffling or equivocating, but don't downplay the limitations of the science. It's fine, and in fact, it's better to say, I don't know, if the answer is I don't know. Say, you know, we don't know that yet, sir, but or ma'am, but you know, we're working on that, and we hope to have that answer by the end of the year, right? This is sometimes catches scientists a little bit off guard, but be prepared to give your opinion, right? So you can present the science, but then don't be surprised when the policymaker says, you know, well, I keep picking on Destiny because you're the one I can see in my window. Well, Destiny, what do you think we should do about stream restoration? You know, because a lot of times scientists aren't used to being asked what their opinion is. It's about the data, and the data speak for themselves. But when you're meeting with a policymaker, they see you as the expert, and they want to know, as an expert, what's your opinion? What do you advocate for? What do you suggest? And then, you know, listen to them as well. It's not a one-sided, no communication is one-sided. So listen as well as speak, and then don't forget the one-pager. And then the last thing I'll say about this is the follow-up afterwards. The follow-up is critical as well. So, you know, if they ask for something and you don't have it, and you say, we can get that to you, the first thing you do when you walk out of the office is you send a text to your lab mate back home and say, can you email a copy of these results to the office of Congressperson so-and-so? And follow up immediately. The follow-up is really important because they get so much sent to them that if you don't follow up until a week later, they've already forgotten who you are. And then when you get back to your campus, do any debriefing you need to do, and consider sitting down with that government relations office and talking to them and doing a debrief with them, because they can give you additional strategies and tips for how to do the right follow-up and where to take it from there. The last thing I'll just say is I'll share this with you, and I'm happy to make these slides available, but that one pager or that leave behind, you know, some things to think about. It should be a single page. It should be just one page on the front, not front and back. Keep it simple, large font, wide margins, lots of white space, pleasing colors, right? Big, bold title. You know, we're thinking infographic here. We're not thinking research paper. There should be a 1-sentence summary you can see it on the top of this sheet. And even this one, I'd say, probably has more text than you want. But and then, you know, visuals, and consider a sidebar with the key issues or the key points that you want to make. And then most importantly, you have to have your name and contact info at the bottom so they know how to follow up with you. And the final thing I'll say is this. Think about the language that you use in these things. It may be different than the language you're used to using with other people. So the attitude and tone should be very diplomatic, and as opposed to overly aggressive or overly enthusiastic. So you want to use words like threaten or increase the risk of or negatively impact, which is sort of softening the blow a little bit, as opposed to destroy or ruin or devastate, right? This won't destroy our environment, but this really threatens our environment and increases the risk of. The reason for that is that if you say, our environment is destroyed, well, then there's nothing we can do about it anyway, game over, right? But if you say things like it increases the risk of, there's still a chance that with policy changes, we can do something about that. So it leaves the window open for some sort of positive action. Similarly, you don't want to say, we're going to fix this or we're going to solve this. You want to say, we're going to improve and enhance this, because if you say you're going to fix it, then they expect that you're going to fix it. So you got to leave a little wiggle room, say, we're going to do what we can with this. And then in the next round of funding, then we'll take further steps forward. And then, finally, avoid superlatives, things like the best, the worst, it's horrible, terrible. You want to leave a little bit of room in your language for sort of some discussion as opposed to very definitive statements. And so I'm going to stop sharing now if I can figure out how. And show. And stop sharing. Okay, so I know I threw a ton at you in 20 minutes, and I'm sorry I threw it at you so quickly. But I think the main take-home points from this are that you want to really think about doing all the things we discussed with media interviews, but on top of that, you want to really think about what are you advocating for? What change are you hoping to affect? Are you trying to get them to change their policy, their funding strategies, or take up a bill in Congress? Be very clear on that in advance, and think of your conversation with them not just as an information dispensing conversation, but one that also allows you to really advocate for a change that you think is necessary. So I think what we want to do, we have about 17 minutes, not quite, we'll say 15. So that'll give us time for maybe one or two sort of practice interviews with the congressperson. And I think Karl volunteered to play the role of...
You can do it if you want, Jory. You could be a Northern California congressman.
You got it. I'm gifting you with the opportunity to be the Republican congressperson from Kentucky.
Eastern Kentucky. Yeah.
Eastern Kentucky. So
flat Earth all the way.
So can we get a different volunteer? We've already had two wonderful volunteers. Can we get a different volunteer who wants to share what they do with the distinguished congressperson from Kentucky and advocate for something based on their research? I saw a hand go up.
Oluwasian, I'm going to guess wildly.
Will you pronounce that for us so we get it right?
Yes, you're right. Oluwasian. Yes.
Oluwasian. Okay.
Oluwasian. Okay.
Great. All right.
I'm 2 for 2 today.
Senator,
That
take it
never
away.
happens. So what is your field, sir? What are you working on?
On public health, my research is on crash injury prevention.
What? I'm sorry. What kind of prevention?
Crash injuries, road crash injuries, road crash injury prevention.
Crush injuries.
Crash, I think he said.
Oh, crash injuries.
Crash,
Sorry.
crash, yes, like road accidents,
Kind of money.
pedestrian accidents, road accidents, and motor vehicle accidents.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a bill coming through the House about autonomous vehicles having a tone on them so that they don't hit pedestrians because they're so dang quiet. But I'm against it because I got a bunch of money from Tesla. So thank you for coming in today. You're here to talk about the quiet car bill. Is that what they call it? Do I sound confused and uninformed? I am. So now here's your chance this is statement number 1. Yes, sir, we're here to discuss blah, blah, blah because...
Thank you so much. Am I starting now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
The clock is running.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much. We are here to discuss about the silent car bill. My name is Oluwasian Adeyemi, and I'm here with my other colleagues at the Department of Public Health, University of North Carolina at Charlotte. We did some work in Kentucky, and we felt that it is important for us to share our findings with you. We know that you know that we have a significant rural community in Kentucky, and living in a rural environment should not be a death sentence. and that's why we are here. We want you to help fund the rural infrastructure that will protect the lives of the people in the rural environments. And what we found, to cut it short, is that those in the rural environment have 4 times the risk of dying compared to the urban environment. And we believe you can use your good office to make this change.
Okay, so what do you want me to do about this?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. In fact, we are hoping that you would consider increasing the funding to the rural community, especially with the trauma one centers, so that they will be staffed and they can respond quickly. We know that response time is a marker of deaths. What we found was that cutting down response time by 1 minute will save as much as 10,000 individuals across the country.
10,000? Wow, that's 10, a lot of people.
Yes. In 2017, SAR, 37,000 people died in the US. And if you can cut it down by just 1 minute.
Pardon the interruption, sir. We don't have a whole lot of time. Isn't this a big city problem? This isn't something that happens in my district. This is like New York and San Francisco, right?
I want to assure you that it is not a New York problem. It is actually a Kentucky problem. It is the problem of rural American communities. In fact, what we found is that those in the urban community, they have the helicopters, they have the cars, they have the speed bikes that can intervene fast. But we don't have that in the rural communities. And that's why we need your good office to intervene here.
All right, we should probably wrap up, Karl.
Very good. Nicely done. I was having fun with you. I don't know if you were watching, but I was distracted. There were things coming at me and my phone was ringing, and that's pretty typical. And that's why you need the lead behind.
When I'm going to jump in, when we do this face-to-face with people, what I would have done is halfway through your opening sentence, I would have walked up to Karl and whispered something in his ear, and he would have looked really distracted for about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And you have to keep going.
I sign something, he brings me something and I read it and sign it. And I just missed the last 30 seconds of what you said. That's why the leave behind is really important. In a nutshell, I'd say your answers were a little too long and too complicated. You want to, similar to a media interview, you want to talk in short little bites so that I can ask you questions, or, I can stop and say, wait a second, what? The long answer, because I'm being interrupted, I'm not going to track with the whole thing. So try to get your argument down into little bites. I loved your response to my parochial concern that this is an urban problem, not a country problem. You nailed that. That's good.
Yeah, you
just know that a policymaker's always got an axe to grind. A journalist is kind of some of them have an axe to grind, but mostly they just really want to understand it. A politician needs to be persuaded or agreed with, and there's not a whole lot of educational space there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you did a fantastic job. I do agree with Karl. My one complaint was that if you could have made your answers a little shorter, because time really is of the essence. But your introduction to yourself and what you're doing was great. I love how right away you mentioned Kentucky twice in the first sentence, I think. Just keep reminding them that you're aware that they're from Kentucky and that you care about Kentucky, right? So playing up to them. You had something about, it should not be a death sentence or something, a very catchy line. I thought that was great. You mentioned how you want to help people. You had some great statistics. I don't know if you made those statistics up about every minute 10,000 people die or something. I'm guessing that's not an accurate statistic, but you had statistics ready to go. I think, you sounded very professional. You sounded very personable. I thought you did a fantastic job, other than I would like you to see you keep the answers a little bit shorter if you can. But overall, considering we put you on the spot like that, you did a beautiful job.
Thank you for volunteering.
Thank you so much. We could do one more really quick one, I think, Karl. Do you want to do one more?
You do it, Jory.
All right. Okay. I'll try one. Okay.
I'm worn out.
I'm not going to do the fake Southern accent, though. I'm from California. I can't fake a good Southern accent. I've only been here 27 years. That's not long enough to pick up an accent. All right. Who's my volunteer, my victim?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Andrew raised his hand right away.
I don't even see him. Oh, there's Andrew. Okay.
Andrew Amuna.
Yeah. Andrew.
And what do you work on, Andrew?
So I am an electrical engineer, so I'm into power systems, so mostly into renewable energy. So more of integration of renewable energy, yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I'm going to be a Californian because that's what I'm
This guy's going to be a pushover, Andrew.
All right. Well, welcome. Hi, I'm Senator Weintraub from San Diego, and I am really delighted that you're visiting our office today. Who are you, and why are you here?
Oh, Senator Weintraub, nice to meet you. My name is Andrew Amuna. I'm a Master of Electrical Engineering student at UNC Charlotte.
Okay.
And
Great
my
state of
research
North Carolina.
in the state of North Carolina, yeah. So my research is actually on renewable energy. I'm sure, as you're aware, since you live in California, you're seeing all the effects of climate change. So actually, the push for renewable energy is almost like actually imminent. Everyone needs to keep on pushing. So that's why I'm here today, just to talk to you about funding and ensuring that we can do more research into integration of renewable energy into our grid.
All right. Well, as you know from my record and from where I live, I'm a big supporter of renewable energy. I think it's one of the most important things and should be a high priority. But I'll tell you what, I got a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle, and I'm fighting with them all the time about this, and they don't agree with me. So, Andrew, what can you tell me that I can tell them to help persuade them to go along with what you and I feel is important about renewable energy?
Yeah, so what I think one thing people are missing out on is the whole talk about whether climate change is really real or not. But one thing that's happening is that the renewable energy industry is growing. And in integrating it, if you don't do it right, you're going to have problems with power supply, and that's going to affect our hospitals, going to affect our lives. It's going to affect generally the whole economy if our supply is not done right. So we really need funding, because even though there's a push to actually get renewables, we need to do it in a way that is seamless without like causing any problems to our current power supply or economy. So this is a problem for everyone, because no matter what they do, whether they agree or not, the industry is growing. We are having more renewable power onto our grids. And if it's not done well, or more research is not done into it, we are going to have problems with just putting all these plants onto the grid.
Well, Andrew, I'll tell you what, this sounds great. I just got a message that I got to get back into the chamber for a vote, so I need to run out right now. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave you here with my staffers. I'd like you to give them a bit more information. Do you have anything you could leave behind with them that would give us some more information about this?
Yeah, so we actually brought this one pager, which has like some statistics on various countries, and the ones that didn't do a lot of research into integrating renewable energies and some of the problems they face, which actually affected their economies, led to high prices in electricity, that I'll leave behind with your staffers. And also looking at other things where it was integrated well and some of the benefits it brought to the economies and things like that. So the one pager is here, and I'll just hand it over to you now.
That would be great. Thanks for leaving that behind. And I'll tell you what, if you could assemble 25 additional reports and send them to my office, you get back to your lab, that would be great. I'd appreciate that as well. Thank you for coming in, and thanks for being a good American and a great scientist.
Yeah, thank you too. Thank you, Senator, for your service.
All right. Nice job. My initial take was, again, very good information, but it felt like the responses were a little bit long. Karl, would you agree?
A little bit.
Yeah.
And you got to know the magic word in any policy discussion is jobs, and your topic lends itself to that beautifully. So you could have said
he did mention it. I think he mentioned
jobs.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that there were, job growth was an important part of this. So I think what you saw from Karl was an example of meeting with a policymaker who's maybe not necessarily
doesn't care.
Yeah. And in my case, I was fully on board but now I'm asking you to do a bunch of work for me to help me convince the
Right.
other people. And so, depending on who you meet with, either one of those is possible. But, again, I think you did a really good job. And I think
On a good visit to Washington, you'll talk to both kinds. I mean, it's good. Our government relations people try to set you up with 2 or 3 people if you're going to make the effort.
Yeah, for sure. And again, we keep saying Washington, but a lot of this happens at the state level too. So it might be Raleigh, it might even be
Heck yeah.
municipal, it might be city.
Get a tax credit for solar back, please.
Absolutely. But no, Andrew, thank you. You did a good job. And I think, we put all 4 of you on the spot and didn't give you any time to prepare. Again, that's not how it would be in the real world. Hopefully you'd have at least 24 hours to prepare for a media interview, or at least a few hours if they call you and you say, can I call you back this afternoon? Again, meeting with policymakers, you're going to know well in advance, and you'll have a chance to work with your government relations office to do that. But
and ask for help. That doesn't come naturally to some scientists, but ask for help. Your campus has professionals in government relations and communications, and they will get you prepared.
Yeah, if you're doing a media interview, go to your office of your news office on campus. If you're going to be doing something with a policymaker, go to your government relations office, and that's their job, is to help prepare you to succeed in these things. So we didn't leave a ton of time for questions, but we do have a couple minutes if anybody has any questions. It looks like maybe there's some in the chat room, but
yeah, the chat started rolling, but it's mostly kudos for Andrew because he did such a good job.
And I'd say all 4 of the volunteers, we appreciate it. Thank you very much. So Aura or Jill, I don't know if you have any sort of concluding comments, but I think we'll wrap it up there, but encourage you. I'm going to go ahead and put my email address in the chat, and please feel free to reach out if you have other questions. If you'd like copies of the PowerPoint, I'm happy to share them with you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Jory and Karl. That was super fun. And big kudos to you for volunteering. I would never have done that myself, and I certainly wouldn't have done so well. Anyway, I just wanted to say real quick, for those of you who are obviously interested in communication, you should sign up for the 3MT competition, which we have coming up very soon. We just extended the application deadline to tomorrow, and your video submissions will be due November 6th. Right, Jill? That's correct. So anyway, I'm just going to put the application address there in the chat for you, and you can go to the CGL website to read, more about the competition. And there's a $500 prize for the first place winner. So you should enter it. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everybody.
It was fun.
Have a great evening.
Time and attention. It was a pleasure to meet all of you.
Thank you, Jory and Karl.
Absolutely.
Be well. Feel free to check in. I left my email in there.
Thanks. Bye.
Slides coming in a minute, Aura.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yep.